England, Spring 1816. The bells of St. Andrew's Church echoed across the quiet countryside as villagers filled the wooden pews. Among them sat 22-year-old Eleanor Hartwell, dressed in a simple pale blue gown. She greeted familiar faces with polite smiles, never imagining that before the service ended, her entire future would be decided without her permission. When the elderly curate unfolded a small piece of paper, the church fell silent. "I publish the banns of marriage between Mr. Edward Blackwood and Miss Eleanor Hartwell." The word struck Eleanor like ice. Every head slowly turned toward her. She remained perfectly still, her hands tightening around the prayer book in her lap. Edward Blackwood was a wealthy widower nearly 20 years older than she was. Twice he had asked for her hand, and twice she had politely refused. Yet now, before the whole parish, their marriage was being announced as though it had already been agreed. The service continued, but Eleanor heard almost nothing else. Outside the church, Edward waited beside the stone gate, holding his hat respectfully. "I hope this has not frightened you," he said gently. Eleanor looked directly into his eyes. "You knew I refused." "I did," he answered calmly. "But your guardian believed you only needed time." Before she could reply, her guardian, Uncle Richard Hartwell, approached with measured steps. "The matter is settled," he said. "This marriage will protect your future." "My future should belong to me," Eleanor replied quietly. Richard sighed as though speaking to a stubborn child. "Until your 25th birthday, the estate remains under my care. Your father trusted me to make wise decisions, and this is one of them." Eleanor felt anger rising inside her. "My father trusted you to protect me, not to choose my husband. If you refuse this marriage, you risk everything. Mr. Blackwood offers security, respect, and stability. You should be grateful." Without another word, Eleanor walked away. That evening she wandered through the gardens of Hartwell Manor, touching the ancient oak trees her father had planted years before his death. She remembered his promise that one day the estate would belong to her, and that she should always choose a life built on respect rather than fear. Now every choice seemed to have been stolen. Returning to the house, she overheard servants preparing for wedding arrangements that she had never accepted. That was the moment her decision became clear. She packed only a small leather bag, a few coins, her mother's silver locket, and a faded letter from an elderly cousin living in Bath who had once written, "If you ever need a safe place, my door will always remain open." Near midnight, while the household slept, Eleanor quietly slipped through the kitchen door. A cold spring rain covered the countryside as she disappeared into the darkness. She had no clear plan, very little money, and no certainty about what waited ahead. But for the first time in many months, every step she took belonged to her alone. Rain poured steadily as Eleanor hurried along the muddy road toward the nearest coaching inn. Her shoes were soaked, her cloak clung to her shoulders, and every gust of wind reminded her how uncertain her future had become. Still, she refused to turn back. When she finally reached the White Hart Inn, the courtyard buzzed with travelers preparing for the last coach of the evening. Eleanor stepped into the shadows, hoping to remain unnoticed, until familiar voices froze her in place. "They couldn't have gone far," one man said. She recognized him immediately. He was one of her uncle's stable hands. "They're searching for me already," she whispered. Panic tightened her chest. If they found her tonight, she would be returned to Hartwell Manor before sunrise, and the wedding would proceed exactly as planned. Then a polished black carriage rolled beneath the inn's archway. Its elegant crest revealed it belonged to one of England's oldest noble families. Without allowing herself time to think, Eleanor quietly opened the carriage door and climbed inside, hiding beneath the opposite seat. Moments later, the door opened again. A tall gentleman entered, removing his gloves as though unaware anyone else was there. Before the carriage moved, he noticed the corner of Eleanor's small leather bag. Instead of shouting, he spoke calmly. "You may come out now." Eleanor slowly lifted her head. The stranger appeared to be around 30 years old, dressed in a dark traveling coat, his calm gray eyes studying her with curiosity rather than anger. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Please don't send me away." Outside, footsteps echoed through the courtyard as her uncle's servants continued searching. Thinking quickly, Eleanor looked directly at the gentleman. "Please, pretend I'm your fiancé until we leave this place." For several silent seconds, he said nothing. Then he lowered the carriage window. "My fiancé is exhausted," he called to the innkeeper in a composed voice. "Kindly have the horses ready. We leave immediately." The servant searching the courtyard stepped aside at once, unwilling to question a nobleman. Only after the carriage disappeared into the darkness did Eleanor finally breathe again. "My name is Julian Ashcroft," the gentleman said quietly. "Duke of Ashcroft. Eleanor Hartwell." She explained everything: her father's will, the estate she could not claim until she turned 25, her guardian's plan to force her into marriage, and her desperate escape. The Duke listened without interrupting. When she finished, silence filled the carriage once more. Finally, Julian spoke. "If your guardian finds you tonight, he will control both your future and your reputation." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I know. My aunt lives at Ashcroft Hall," he continued. "She is respected throughout the county. No one would dare remove a young lady from her protection." Eleanor hesitated. "I cannot repay such kindness." "I'm not asking for payment," Julian replied. "Only one condition." She looked at him. "Until you are legally free, the world must believe our engagement is genuine." Eleanor understood immediately. It was the only story society would accept. For the first time since leaving home, hope quietly replaced fear. As dawn began to color the eastern sky, the carriage turned through the iron gates of Ashcroft Hall, carrying Eleanor toward a future she never expected. Life at Ashcroft Hall settled into a quiet rhythm. Under Lady Ashcroft's guidance, Eleanor slowly regained the confidence that fear had stolen from her. She spent her mornings reading estate records, learning how successful lands were managed, while the Duke handled his own affairs with quiet determination. Although they lived under the same roof, Julian never treated their engagement as anything more than a promise made to protect her. He always respected her space, spoke honestly, and never asked for gratitude. Weeks later, an unexpected letter arrived from an old steward who had served Eleanor's late father for many years. "Miss Hartwell," it read, "your guardian has ordered dozens of the oldest oak trees cut down. The timber has been sold, but the money has never appeared in the estate accounts." Eleanor's heart sank. Those trees had been planted by her grandfather. They belonged to the estate that would soon be hers. Julian carefully examined the documents. "This is more than poor management," he said. "If the accounts are false, your guardian has broken the law." Using his legal knowledge and influence, the Duke quietly collected contracts, receipts, and witness statements. Everything pointed to the same truth: Richard Hartwell had secretly profited from property that did not belong to him. Finally, Eleanor's 25th birthday arrived. According to her father's will, Hartwell Manor and every acre of land officially became hers. The following morning, Richard arrived at Ashcroft Hall expecting to demand her return. Instead, he found the Duke waiting with lawyers and the original estate records. "You no longer have authority over Miss Hartwell," Julian said calmly. "These documents also raise serious questions regarding the sale of estate timber." Richard's confidence disappeared. For the first time, he realized he could neither control Eleanor nor silence the truth. Within weeks, the court ordered him to repay the missing money and permanently removed him from any responsibility over the Hartwell estate. At last, Eleanor returned home, not as a frightened young woman, but as the rightful mistress of Hartwell Manor. A few days later, Julian came to say goodbye. "Our agreement has ended," he said with a gentle smile. "You are free now. Your future belongs entirely to you." Eleanor looked around the garden where her father had once walked with her as a child. "When I first entered your carriage," she said softly, "I believed you had rescued me." Julian smiled. You rescued yourself. I only opened a door. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor stepped closer. The first proposal made for me was never my choice. She looked directly into his eyes. But this one can be. Julian's expression softened. Are you certain? She nodded. Completely. That autumn, they were married in the same village church where Eleanor had once stood in silence. This time, every promise spoken belonged to two willing hearts. The villagers would later say that Hartwell Manor had finally found the future its late owner had always hoped for, not through duty or fear, but through love, respect, and the freedom to choose.